Hi, everyone. I hope this finds each of you so very well. I'm speaking to you today from my studio in West Orange, New Jersey, and I'm absolutely delighted to have this opportunity to introduce all of you to Reid Peterson, a grief counselor who is the creator and founder of a mobile app for grief support called Grief Refuge. Reid will be speaking to us today from Santa Barbara, California. Reid has a master's degree in transpersonal psychology, and he has been certified in death and grief studies by the Center for Loss and Life Transition. After losing his biological father to suicide in 2006 and his stepfather to cancer in 2016, he felt a calling to help the grieving find peace and purpose after loss. Reid's Grief Refuge app is a daily companion that helps navigate the grief journey, providing comfort and solace in a time of need. Its 7 features, including daily audio musings and a tool to track a person's grief progress, help a person to cope with loss and feel supported throughout the grief journey. Right off the top of my head, I know of about 5 people who could use this grief app. They have had recent losses, and it would be so comforting for them. I'm looking forward to talking with Reid about the loss of his 2 father figures, his healing journey through grief and loneliness, and the creation of his Grief Refuge app. This will surely be a very informative interview about an app that can provide the grieving with great comfort and solace. Hey, Reid, welcome to
Thank you, Irene.
Podcast. Such a pleasure.
Thank you. I'm just lucky. I'm a lucky person because I feel like I have a strong intuitive sense, and I can kind of, filter through when somebody's just kind of talking to talk, the lip service, I think we call that here in the States. But I can hear the mission in your voice. I can hear you're purpose driven. And that's why I feel lucky to be having this conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think we're both 2 lucky, blessed people because it's my pleasure to meet you. And I think that your app can help so many people. So let's have them get to know you better. So after losing your biological father to suicide in 2006 and your stepfather to cancer in 2016, you felt a calling to help the grieving find peace and purpose after loss. Could you please tell us about the profound loss of these 2 father figures in your life? And how did those losses inspire you to create your app?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief
because you have some time. It's okay.
Truthfully, it is a long, complicated story. If you think about it, there's 10 years apart between my dad dying and then my stepfather dying. But here's where I'll start.
Can I just ask one question before we start? So were you living with your stepdad or your dad?
Yeah, I was living with my stepdad. So my dad lived about 5 miles away. And when growing up, my mom and my biological father, they divorced when I was 3. And so Warren, my stepfather, he entered my life probably maybe like only a year and a half later, and was crazy but loving enough to move in because it was also my older sister and my younger brother. So he came into basically a family already, and he didn't have any kids of his own. And boy, he embraced us and just kind of, showed up as a loving father figure in our lives. And so that's a little bit about our foundation. And
your stepfather, what kind of guy was your dad?
So my dad, he was the world's #1 complainer.
So your mom went from complaining to happy.
Yes. She actually did find her soulmate. She didn't find her soulmate in my biological father, but she did find her soulmate in my stepfather, Warren. And so my dad, so there's a lot of negative perceptions about my dad. He did struggle with post-traumatic stress. He did struggle with alcoholism, and he was a violent person. And so fortunately, he didn't take out any physical abuse on me. So I had, as most can be, noble and somewhat positive relationship with my dad. It was tough growing up because it was kind of like this stranger that, as a sensitive person, I would say, oh, I'm supposed to know this guy, I'm supposed to love him, he's supposed to love me. But there always felt like this strong, uncomfortable connection between us, because I was just like, I don't really know much about my dad. But I would see him, every week or every 2 weeks. He lived in town. I grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he wasn't too far away. But it was, uh, dad divorced with visitation rights, and spending time with, grandparents and his side of the family, trying to just live normally, I guess. And then, but there was just a lot of struggle, a lot of emotional struggle in that. And then also knowing, as I became a teenager and a young adult, coming to learn a little bit more about, like, his suffering in his physical form. And he unfortunately really didn't find a strong sense of healing in his own, with his own challenges and his own hardships. Post-traumatic stress really affected his life, and his identity was, I'm a Vietnam vet and I'm effed up. And so he kind of let that guide him. And he struggled with drinking, and eventually, it's a complicated story, but he did take his life. And he was severely under the influence of alcohol at the time.
Mm.
And so it was tragic, as far as what happened, the event that caused his death. But at the same time, like, it's been almost 16 years, Irene, and I still sometimes wonder, I'll never know, but I still sometimes wonder, it's possible that this could have been an accident. This, may have not been planned, because the way he died, he actually hit the top of his head on a wall and severed his cervical spine.
Well, this is a very spiritual podcast, Reid, and I know a lot of people who could tell you the answer to that story and tell you all about that. So, well, at the end, I will guide you to a few podcasts, interviews with some people who could probably give you that information.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I've contemplated working with mediums, to try to talk to them. My brother actually has some gifts of mediumship himself. He's reserved, but he's shared bits and pieces about his communication with our father. And it's unfortunately, the perspective my brother shares is it's still not necessarily all light. And I'm like, oh, interesting. And my soul mourns for my dad a lot. And it led to, like, a long grief period. Actually, I started feeling tremendous relief at first, because I had such a narrative, Irene, that my relationship with my dad was like me being present to his suffering. And so when he physically left his body, I was like, okay, I no longer have to feel like what felt like a burden I carried. And so there was huge relief. But then probably within a few months after that initial experience, I actually felt a tremendous amount of guilt, a lot of guilt. And I processed that for quite a few years. And then
and the fact that your father didn't get healing, probably deep down, or maybe not so deep down, is part of the motivation that you want to help people heal with your app.
Yeah, it very well could be. Yeah, I've tried to ask myself, thousands of times, why do I do this? Like, I always want to make sure I understand my purpose and my mission. And I'm like, oh, there is a part of me that just feels, that you mentioned that calling. It just feels like, hey, I'm on this earth to help people heal.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I know best. I know grief best. and I know, like, stories and experiences and just understanding. And one thing I'll say quickly is, like, unfortunately, people that are grieving just feel so judged for their experience. And I've just learned how to show up and have no judgment about where they're at, whether, no matter what emotion that is, that may be kind of forefront on their experience. But yes, Irene, I agree with you. I'm like, perhaps, there's this thing about me wanting to feel like so available to help other people in their healing, because there's still something within my soul, my heart, my mind, that I'm probably seeking some healing myself.
Yeah, no, that's the way it happens with all of us, I think it's part of that journey. I mean, I'm spurred to do this, and it started with the death of my husband next to me in a car accident. So we all are led to if we want to hear the calling, we find our purpose. So you lost your father to suicide. You went through all that. We talked about that. Then your stepfather, who's really raised you as his son, dies of cancer in 2016. So that's a whole other experience for you.
A whole other experience.
So what was that like for you?
Yeah. So for me, the hardest part, I'll say, is I was 2,000 miles away. And so my stepfather, he fought multiple myeloma for 8 years. And I just was in awe of how ambitious he was and positive, and just felt like tremendous amount of respect for him doing everything he can to keep living. He had an affirmation: I'm going to live another 30 plus years. And I was just like, I was just blown away, because he had so many, in addition to the cancer, he developed so many other illnesses as side effects to all the medications. And it really made me question, I observed him and kind of like the deterioration of his physical body. And it really, I pondered a lot about, when does one determine, is there a quality of life? When is there no longer a quality of life? And it's something I continue to think about, actually. But I heard in his voice, that will to live. And so he fought. And then, I think it got to a point where, I remember having one of my last conversations with Warren on the phone, where he just said, I'm so tired. And I was reading between the lines, and it was almost like me listening to the energy of the way he was saying it. And I was like, okay, I think, he's getting ready to throw in the towel. He's ready to let go. He just is exhausted. And I think it was beyond physically exhausted, of course. It was mentally too, and emotionally.
Well, being a sensitive person, your mom is still with you?
Yes.
So you watched her go through all that too. She watched her taking care of him and going through her own grieving process, probably also.
Yeah, that's part of my story, Irene, because I'm actually one of 5 children that my mom had. And my wife and I are the only ones who don't have our own children. And I say that because I was a little bit more available to help support my mom as she was supporting Warren. My mom wasn't a registered nurse, so she became Warren's full-time caretaker.
Wow.
Like in all aspect.
Oh my
and so I could tell when I would call to check in both with Warren and my mom, that my mom needed emotional support. And that's where I felt like my kind of crash course in learning how to companion someone developed. Because I was no longer my mom's son. I was my mom's anticipatory grief companion. And so there were many conversations in the evenings that my mom cried and I listened, and just kind of.
It's a beautiful thing, though. It's a beautiful thing that you were there for her.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, it's wonderful. And it was part of your calling here. Here we go. So you share that counseling and bereavement groups were not able to fill the loneliness for you. So you, after both Warren and your dad died, did you go to counseling and bereavement groups for both of them?
I did. Yeah. So what I decided to find a counselor because after Warren died, I just felt such immense loneliness that I didn't understand why, because I was kind of comparing a bereavement process with Warren to a bereavement process with my dad, and they were just so night and day different, and I didn't understand. And so having studied psychology, I thought, oh, maybe if I work with a counselor, I might discover some aspects of, grieving my biological father, and this whole complexity. And so that's why I chose a counselor. But then I also chose a bereavement support group in my local community, just because I thought, oh, it'd be nice to hear other stories too, because I was noticing, with the exception of my wife, who's a wonderful listener and 100% supportive, people in my larger community, stuff I did recreational social activities with, they just weren't available to hold space. And so I was like, okay, part of my healing could benefit from other people who, it didn't even have to be a similar loss, such as the loss of a parent. It could have been any type of loss, but just people who were aware that listening and not trying to fix is really crucial in helping somebody with their own healing journey.
So you were in these groups, but it didn't really work for you, right? Even though you went to these groups, you were still lonely and you were still struggling.
Yeah, I would say it actually worked because it helped me have perspective, but it also didn't work because I continued to feel lonely. And I continued to realize, like, oh, there must be like some kind of like source of media or medium or something that would be beneficial to a griever like myself on a more consistent basis. And that's essentially how like the Grief Refuge app as a concept started to formulate, like what could be available to somebody more on a consistent basis.
That makes a lot of sense, really. And it's interesting because you still felt lonely. I hear you're one of 5 siblings.
Right.
You were married at the time, right? And you're still married, and want to keep that clear. But you're married, and to a lovely lady, and she's there, but you're still within yourself. You felt lonely.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah, that's really good insight. I did, yeah. And I just couldn't understand what was the
What's
source.
missing? What is this about?
Yeah.
So let's talk about your there's another story you talk about. How did your attempt to be a voice on the Calm meditation app lead you to create the Grief Refuge app?
Sure. Yeah, after navigating a lot of my loneliness and grief experience, I decided, like, so at the time I wasn't using my degree, so to speak. I wasn't, a full-time counselor or therapist or anything. And I was talking to my wife and I said, I think it's time to start, offering healing. I know that my heart, my soul, my personality is all kind of like, the framework of a healer. And so I was like, it's now time. I can't continue to resist this anymore. And so I sought out some training, Irene, and I found the Center for Loss and Life Transition. They're based out of Colorado, and they provide, like a death and grief study certification. And so I was doing these trainings. And
you were doing it online?
These are in person, actually.
Oh, wow. So you're living in California and you went to Colorado.
Yeah, about 8 months of the year, maybe 9 months of the year, their trainings are in Colorado, and then 3 months of the year they're in Scottsdale, Arizona. So it's kind of picking and choosing which trainings I was going to and going there. But to get to the answer to your question, one of these trainings, I gave a presentation, and after the presentation, 3 different classmates approached me and said, "I just got to tell you something. There's something very soothing about your voice."
Oh.
And engaging in the conversation, I was like, yeah, thank you, I really appreciate that. I've heard that my voice can be somewhat hypnotic and really help somebody drop down into a calming effect. So that word gets spoken, and then one of the classmates says, "Hey, you should be on the Calm app." And I was like, "That's not a bad idea." And so we started looking at her Calm app and looking for grief categories. And I'm like, oh, they could have a whole grief support category on this Calm app. That would be great, because already, so many people already know about it. And I reached out to Calm. I found the head of content there. And surprisingly, I reached out to her. I believe it was on LinkedIn. And I actually got a response. I thought, no way. And so my idea was actually entertained for a while, but it eventually didn't really lead to anywhere. And so I was like, okay, I'm a nobody. Calm, they partner with celebrities and, sports figures and, people that, have a bazillion TikTok followers. I don't even know. And so I was like, all right. And I'm on this hike with my wife and her best friend, and her best friend basically says, "Hey, you can do better." And I'm like, do better than Calm? Are you kidding me? Like, there's no way I'm going to do better than Calm. She's like, no, I'm not talking about numbers and as far as downloads. I'm talking about Reid, you've got a gift. Why don't you share it? Why don't you make an app? And I'm like, oh gosh, I don't know how to program. And so, excluding all the details, it just led one step to another.
Absolutely. That's why you're talking to me on this podcast today. One step leads to the next. Absolutely.
And then, yeah, it came to fruition.
Absolutely. So please share with our listeners some of the many benefits and features provided in your Grief Refuge app that they want to immediately avail themselves of as soon as we're done with this podcast. So tell us about what they get if they
okay. Yeah. So actually, the thing that people like the most is every day there's content that's published, and the content's audio based. And we call this feature the Daily Refuge. And these are like grief meditations / grief reflections. And so they're audio narrated by yours truly. I do the audio narration, and every day somebody gets one of these brand new. And so it helps them just kind of sit with their experience. Like some people use it to mourn, they listen to it and they cry. Some people listen to it to just kind of feel validated of okay, what I'm going through is real for me. It's truthful. I am not crazy. Because a lot of people start to think they're crazy because the grief is so overwhelming. And so these messages, these musings, they help validate an experience such as that. So that's the main feature. But in addition to that, everybody using the app has a journal access. There is a feature called intentions. And that's really these kind of self-care tips, because a lot of times our brains are so overwhelmed, our hearts are shattered when we're grieving, that we do need a little bit of guidance, just for whatever it is, practically speaking, for the day. There's also, you mentioned the thing about a tool to track progress.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to full out say, as far as a grief journey, it's individual and it's unique to everyone experience it. I actually don't believe in stages of progression through grief. I think it's, a complicated spiral that takes twists and turns in every different direction. And some days it will feel like 3 steps forward, and then the next day it will feel like 15 steps backwards. But I will say the tool exists for people who just want to look at how they're doing and get a sense of, practically speaking, where I'm at now. So it helps answer that question. Here's where I'm at now. And then I can compare it looking backwards.
Right.
So
you give them healing choices also, or encourage them to do anything like that, Reid? Or
that would be within the intentions features. Some gentle guidance into ways to reach out to a loved one, or ways to set boundaries if you feel like your boundaries are being really disrespected or something like that.
And to the subject of loneliness, how does your app fill in that blank? Because that's definitely an intention of yours to help people to overcome that feeling of loneliness.
Yeah, two things come to mind. First, the idea that it's daily content that's published. And so in my own experience, as I said, well, the counseling would happen once a week. The grief support group would happen once a week. So, there were essentially was 5 days out of the week where I kind of felt like I was on my own. I felt like, okay, this is when the loneliness is hitting me the hardest. And so it helps fill that void because of the content that's published daily. And then the other aspect is just slipped my mind, but it'll come to me. The validation piece. I make strong associations with people feeling validated for their own personal experience to help ease and comfort some of the loneliness that they may be.
I think that's so important, so that they know that they're not weird and that what they're going through is pretty normal. And there are a lot of other people in the same boat. Absolutely. Tell me in what ways the Grief Refuge mobile app helps a person to cope with the loss of a loved one. Let's talk about physically, emotionally, socially, and spiritually.
Well, it's a tough question to answer because I kind of perceive them to be all integrated.
Okay, so
But
tell us about it as in an integrated way.
So I think, because it's an application and it's audio-based, significantly, a lot of the content is audio. Somebody could actually go for a walk and listen to the things. So, there's helping getting somebody out of the house and helping getting like into nature. I really am a huge advocate for anyone grieving, spending time in nature. The app is kind of built to bring nature to the user, but physically, slight movement, gentle movements, there's some help there in the healing process there too. But mentally, cognitively, it's really about perspective. It's really about gaining insight and gaining perspective. Like my mentor, Dr. Alan Wolfelt, he wrote a book called Understanding Your Grief. And a lot of the concepts of understanding your grief are really tied into a lot of the content of the app, because it's that question again, like, am I going crazy? Or am I going to be this way for the rest of my life? These are a lot of, mentally challenging questions that really impact somebody's mind. And then, that plays in emotionally too, because it helps them address or embrace specific feelings that may be otherwise very uncomfortable to embrace. And then spiritually, I think it's just like, the first thing that comes to my mind regarding the spiritual component is it helps people understand that they're not as alone, because there's stories shared on the app, and it helps them understand like, hey, I may not proactively find a community of people that are grieving, and can understand what I'm going through, but I can hear that through the app itself. I can hear those messaging through the app. And then also a lot of the topics, they're not necessarily geared towards mediumship and communicating with a loved one who's passed, but I believe, in some of my own values and some of my own beliefs, I just believe that like there's so much to our experience in life that connects us all for certain reasons. And I'm sure
That's
that
a very spiritual concept, Reid.
Yeah, I'm sure that, as we continue to get to know each other, we'll fully understand how the dots connect us, and, we'll understand that connection. And so hearing the stories on the app, that helps people make those types of connections too.
Right. So like speaking about one of those personal stories in the app, have you got one that to reflect on that can be found in the Grief Refuge app? Have you got one coming to you that people can understand the kind of thing that they will hear on the app about people's stories?
Most of the stories tie into someone just feeling validated. Like, a lot of people say like, my sleep patterns got so thrown off before I found your app. And then, the app helps me fall asleep. It's like one of the only things that help me fall asleep, because it comforts me. It helps me understand like I'm actually living something that is real. This isn't as surreal as what it seems like. This helps me like kind of ground in my own struggle, as I navigate the grief. And it also supports someone to say like, I kind of need to be here right now. And although my steps in whatever direction I'm going may be very small right now, I'm still moving. I'm not stuck in my grief. And so like most of the stories are tied to that. It's not like one
Do
specific.
people come on and they said, talk a little bit about their stories, or you relate some of the stories to people?
Actually, some of the people submit their stories after they've
Wow,
experienced a
cool.
sense of healing, and then I'll narrate the story as it's and it can be shared.
That's really great. And tell me, are there truly moments when it's normal, appropriate, and proper to experience sorrow of the soul? And do those moments aid the healing process?
I think so. Yeah, I studied the concept of dark night of the soul in graduate school, and I think for grieving, my best metaphor or analogy is that if the heart is shattered or the soul is shattered, because some people feel very strong soul connections to someone they love. I know that's part of your story, Irene. And I think that on a spiritual evolution, of course, nobody asked for this, but I think that like if there's soul contracts, that's part of the negotiation. I think that if there's spiritual evolution and spiritual development, which I believe there is, I think that suffering needs to happen, because otherwise our minds, I think, are structured in certain ways where we can get comfortable. And when we get comfortable, we don't necessarily look beyond the comfort zones. We don't, I think grief, it's not as lenient. It's a little bit more forced, because like I said, nobody ever asks for a loss. But
it throws you into a choice.
Yes, exactly.
Throws you into a choice.
Yeah, you come to this choice, and like, it's almost like a forced way of opening the mind.
If you choose to do that, right? Exactly. So I know that you also, in addition to this app, you have grief retreats, right? So tell us all about them. Where do they take place? What happens? Are they online? Are they, just tell us all about them?
Okay. Yeah. If you remember me companioning my mom, it's interesting because a lot of people that reach out to me, they actually are widowed. They've lost a husband, they've lost a wife, they've lost their marital spouse, and their souls are shattered, and they're just looking for something. And so a lot of these retreats are really about helping getting them into nature. So in physical locations, our last one was in southern Indiana in early October, and it was just looking at a space.
So you held them in different, you hold them in different areas of the country or whatever.
Yeah.
And how long do they last?
So they're Thursdays through Sundays. We kind of start about Thursday late afternoon and then through Sunday morning. And what we do at these retreats is there's a lot of sharing, a lot of space to just converse, commune, and share. But there's also a lot of space to do ceremony. We do ceremony to honor. We do ceremony to, cherish. We do ceremony to be in community with each other for meaningful experiences that just help solidify the love shared. Although, the special person's no longer here.
Right. I'll bet people make very significant connections and new friendships at your retreats, because there's a commonality that they've been through, and they understand each other. They're
You're
meeting
exactly
like
right.
they're
Yeah.
meeting like souls, like people. It's probably really wonderful.
Yes. And that, that's when the retreats have come to close. I go home and I think how many, I don't know, I could count a million times how many times I've thought, the people, the participants, they're all meant to meet each other.
I'll bet. And do people tell us how people find out about them? They go on the Grief Refuge app website, or where do they go to find out about these retreats?
Either that,
And about your app.
yeah, either the app or the website. The retreats are listed on both griefrefuge.com or the Grief Refuge app. And then for people that want the app, you can just look up Grief Refuge in your phone's app store.
Oh, that's great. And what is the Reid tip for finding joy in life?
Well, I think as I've definitely been somebody who's been more serious. And I used to think like I laughed at really strange things. And I used to be a little bit self-conscious about it. But what I'll say is the joy to life is like embracing the humor that makes you laugh. That I think that's, what I've come to learn in my time on this planet so far is, hey, whatever makes you laugh, and if it feels authentic, that'll bring you joy.
It's true that a lot of people take things so seriously. And I look at grief as that's something to be serious about. But having gone through all this, when I have a chance to laugh and to kind of be light and let it out, I welcome it, and that in a way, once you get past, you've done a lot of healing. I think the fact that you can get to that laughter and joy is just wonderful, right?
Yeah.
Wonderful thing.
Can't agree with you more.
Right. So Reid, your very admirable mission is to help the grieving find peace and purpose after loss. And by creating your Grief Refuge healing app, you are certainly making large strides in accomplishing your mission. Thank you for creating the Grief Refuge healing app, which is filled with sage insights and guidance for managing grief. And I thank you from my heart for this informative and such a helpful interview today. And here's a loving reminder, everyone, that you can see the show notes and all Grief and Rebirth podcast episodes on ireneweinberg.com. And make sure to follow us and like us on social at Irene S. Weinberg on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And if you're watching here on YouTube, be sure to click subscribe below so you'll never miss an episode. As I like to say, to be continued. Many blessings. Thank you so much, Reid, and bye for now.